And so they just read this version. They would keep that for you.
Oh, also, I forgot to mention, so we've been recording all of these user group meetings, and I actually uploaded them to a YouTube channel for the Office 365 user group, which is on our website. And so I'll send out the link after this, but just so you know, they're all out there.
Sounds familiar. A lot of companies do that.
Not
I was in the process of trying to learn a lot of things that wasn't supposed to.
Yeah. It's always changing.
So like if I, when I call people that do it on that set.
All right, everyone ready? Got your pizza and all situated?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, thanks everyone. I hope everyone can hear me all right. If not, feel free to shout out and I will talk louder. Thank you guys for joining. This is going to be, I'm going to talk about Introduction to Modern SharePoint today. So hopefully you guys are in the right place. Real quick, I'm going to talk about myself because why not? I'm going to do it for an hour because, you know, I have a captive audience. Anyway, so I'm an Office Apps and Services MVP. My name is Nick Brattoli. I've known Sharon and John for quite a while. I'm also an MCT, the community manager over at collab365.community. If you've never heard of that site before, visit it. We're actually doing a 3-day free online SharePoint conference this week. So you can sign up to that if you want to watch a bunch of free videos on SharePoint. I'm also a consultant independently. I've been doing that for about 5 years, been working with SharePoint for over a decade, IT for over 15 years, from Ohio, but I live in Alabama now, and I like to do nerdy projects and train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Anyway, on to the fun stuff. I'm going to talk fast. If you need to slow me down, feel free to speak up. It's just that this is a big session, and I've come close to running out of time on more than one occasion doing it. So first thing I want to talk about is what modern SharePoint actually is. And the easiest way to do that is to discuss some of the benefits of doing that. The first one, which is not even on this bulleted list, is that it's the only thing Microsoft is going to be supporting in the future. The classic sites aren't necessarily going away yet. They don't have an end date, but they're not putting any new effort into it. So that's one of the main reasons you're going to be forced eventually if you want to keep making new SharePoint sites. But there are some real benefits to it. It's way more dynamic than classic SharePoint. And when I say dynamic, I mean that in two different ways. Both in that design, in that it's responsive design. It will fit any device you look at it, and also in the way that you can organize your content and how you can display it. And I'm going to talk about site architecture a little bit later, and I'll also talk about what kinds of dynamic content you can show. But classic SharePoint had issues where someone would go in, they'd create a page or they'd create some other content in your SharePoint site and then never touch it again, and it just sits there stagnant for years and years. There's things in modern SharePoint you can do to keep that content kind of dynamically updating. It's a lot more simple and user-friendly, and by that, again, I'm talking about design, how you do the content, how you put sites together. You used to have to call a special SharePoint person to do anything in SharePoint. Now the amount of times you're going to have to send that email or pick up the phone is going to be a lot lower than it used to be. It's prettier, that's objective, and I'm going to show you some examples later, but in my opinion, you can do a lot more with less, again, without having to call a SharePoint developer. Because of all of these things, because you can have the content stay fresh, because it's prettier, because it works on mobile devices, and because it's easier for users to build, you're going to get faster adoption, and I've seen that in the real world. My customers tend to adopt modern SharePoint a lot faster than I've seen in Classic over the years. So I'm going to show examples along the way, but I want to talk about how architecture works first before we do that. And again, architecture can mean a few things. In SharePoint on premises, that means your servers, how you set up your servers. Modern SharePoint, you can really only do it in 2019 on premises, and even then it's limited. So I'm going to be focusing more on site architecture and information architecture throughout this session. So I want to talk about that. I'm going to jump into this again later. But one of the major differences between modern SharePoint and classic SharePoint is how you organize your sites. And a lot of you guys in the room probably are familiar with this. It used to be you would make one root SharePoint site, something.com, and that would be your main SharePoint site. And then you would make subsites under that, and maybe subsites under those, and maybe subsites under those, and permissions and navigation and other things can roll up through that hierarchy. That's fine, and some of that behavior is still desired, but the problem was if you wanted to make any changes or if you broke something along that chain, down that pyramid hierarchy that you have, if you broke something down the road, it breaks everything below it. So what they've done now is they've gone to a more flat hierarchy where you're not using subsites, you're using a single site collection, so one site collection per site, and you can group them together dynamically in ways that make sense for the time. And if you decide that you want to change it, you can change it. And I'll explain how you do that on the next slide. What they did to help organize this is they created what's called a hub site. And a hub site is any SharePoint site that you designate as a hub to group other sites around. If you can see in the background these images that I'm using, for example, maybe I have a communications hub site, and then I have a couple other sites that are related to it, and I can group them right there. And they're not necessarily under communications. They'll get a roll-up of search, news, events, look and feel, navigation, but the permissions don't necessarily inherit. You can do other things when you join the hub site to make those permissions inherit, but by default, these are just separate sites and you're grouping them more logically rather than physically. And you can group them in a few different ways. You can group them by department, that's a real common one, or location, say you're worldwide and you want to do a UK group, or maybe you've got data sovereignty and you have to do specific groups of sites if you want to open that can of worms. And so you can group these by location. You can group them by function. For example, engineering, maybe you have mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. So you want to have an engineering hub where they can go in there and find all their engineering stuff and go from there to their individual sites and start working together. So how does that work? We've got our architecture. We've decided to flatten our architecture of grouping sites in this hub and spoke model, more so the old pyramid hierarchy model. So that is a major change, and that's a battle you're going to have to fight if you're leading a SharePoint update or a migration. That's probably a battle you're going to have to fight because it takes a lot to get users to shift from the idea of a hierarchy with inheritance down versus a hub and spoke model that's dynamic where you can move sites around. If I decide that the site that's under communications really needs to belong under training and education, it's 3 clicks, I can move it over there and it doesn't break any of the other sites. So you can explain the benefits to them, and I will tell you though, it's still going to be somewhat of a battle to get them to agree to that kind of an architecture. But it's it's worth it. Next, I want to talk about types of sites. In classic SharePoint, there used to be a ton of different templates. You had workspaces, you could go get the Fab 40 in 2007, and there was a bunch of different templates. But they've kind of pared that down, because even in classic, those were all really just variations of a team site. It was just different features that were turned on and off. And what they've done in Modern is they've kind of narrowed that down even more into two main types of sites. And I'm going to talk about it on the slides, but then I'm going to start actually demoing you some stuff. So the first one I want to talk about is a communication site. And that is made for disseminating information throughout your company, not necessarily to everybody, but for bigger groups. It's pretty, there's, by default, the layouts are made to look more dynamic and more like a regular website that you would look at on the internet. It does not connect to Teams. If you're familiar with Microsoft Teams, that they have a SharePoint to store your files. Those don't go on top of a communication site. They go on top of the next site I'm going to show you. So you don't get anything extra with it. You don't get an Office 365 group with it. You don't get any of those other bells and whistles and integrations that you would get with the other type of SharePoint site, the team site. But it's really just made to show information. So let me show you what a team site could look like. And this is a modified version of the default one they give you when you create one, because you create a blank site. It gives you this what's called a hero web part. And we'll talk about web parts later. But you can see that the navigation is at the top versus the left navigation you may be familiar with in classic SharePoint and what you're going to see in a second with team sites. This looks more like a traditional modern website. This is it will fully work on any device. It's responsive. And I have a bunch of cool stuff on here. And you can see this is clearly, I've got company news on here and company events, and I've got things like weather widgets and a company Twitter feed and a countdown to event. This is clearly made for everyone to see. This is not an HR site for HR only, right? And you can do a lot of things here that are very cool. But the main takeaway from this is that a communication site does not have all the integrations into the other Office 365 applications. It does not create an Office 365 group. And your navigation is going to be at the top. Use these for hub sites. This is actually a hub site. Like I said before, hub sites can be any SharePoint site. It's a designation. And I can tell that by looking up at this navigation that, again, we'll talk about navigation later, but this is my hub navigation. You can see this communication site is part of the corporate comms hub site. So any SharePoint site you go to, if it's under a hub site, you'll know which hub site it's under. Okay. Again, if you guys have any questions, I can't see you, so please let me know. Okay, so communication sites. They have lots of web parts, and you will have all the same web parts on the next site I'm about to show you. And that's team sites. You should be familiar with these. Team sites work almost identically. They have all the same web parts. You can make the same layouts and stuff like that, except that the navigation is going to be on the left, and you get all of the other bells and whistles that communication sites do not have. You, by default, will get an Office 365 group, and what that is that determines who has access to what resources. So a group can hook into Teams or Exchange, Planner, lots of different things inside Office 365. If you're not familiar with Office 365 groups, I would recommend starting to pull that thread and see what you find. You can associate these team sites with Microsoft Teams. When you make Microsoft Teams, it creates a team site for you. You could also create a team site first and then hook up Microsoft Teams to it later. Let's take a look at what one of those are. So here's my communication site again. Over here, I have a team site. I've got the same color scheme. I have the same navigation at the top because, again, these are under the same hub. They're both under the corporate comms hub. So this is going to be the same. And you notice now I don't have top navigation. I have left navigation. That's a very easy way to see that you're on a team site. If I go to my permissions up here, if I go to my site permissions, you can see it's actually by groups. That's got members and owners, and these are actually Office 365 group members, as opposed to just regular permissions built on straight on this SharePoint site. So whoever I add to these groups will have permissions to everything that group has access to, rather than just the SharePoint site. The base layout it gives you is not as pretty as the base layout that communications give you, right? With this hero web part and all this other stuff. By default, the base layout a team site is going to give you will show things like activity, like recent activity, and maybe a calendar. There's things like that, and your little promoted links that go up there. I always tear all of that out and make my own page. But beyond that, it's just a SharePoint page. Pages work the same. Everything else works the same. Web parts work the same web parts, things like that. There are some new things that are coming out. They just mentioned this at the SharePoint conference in Vegas, a couple months ago now. There's this new designation called SharePoint home sites. When I was talking earlier about the old architecture of SharePoint, you used to have a root SharePoint site and then you'd put all the other sites under it. But this flat architecture that I'm talking about doesn't allow for that anymore. Where's your home site? And you would just make a SharePoint site collection in the past, and you would just say, hey, users, bookmark this. This is now your home site. So what they've announced is this new home site. You can designate a site, ideally a communication site, as a home site, and you can use this kind of as your top-level corporate site for all. You can get content from everywhere, and that means all of the sites that you follow, all of your OneDrive stuff. You can do your recent documents. It's kind of a portal for you to come in, and it's personalized. So you can see news articles that others may not be able to see. You can see information from your teams. If you see over on the right-hand side in this little screenshot, there's My Workspaces, and that will show things that you look at in Teams or in SharePoint. So there's some new web parts that are coming out to kind of give you this portal that brings everything together. I don't have that in my tenant yet. I don't know when they're rolling it out everywhere, so I can't show you a real demo of it, except they've added this thing called a vertical column. If you see over to the right, they have a column that goes all the way from the top to the bottom. And if we go back to my communication site, I have one of those on here. So that has already come out. It's part of the home sites, but again, I didn't get all of the other web parts yet, and I don't think they're done with all of them necessarily yet. But you now have this new piece to kind of put personalized information in it, or at least that's what they want you to do with it. I just kind of put a bunch of web parts in it because I think it's cool for other reasons as well. So those new home sites, look for those to be rolling out. I don't have a time for you. If I had to guess, it'll be before the end of the year. That's usually, whenever they announce something, usually that's how long it takes. It's usually within that year. Okay, and then one other thing that I wanted to talk about that is not a type of site in SharePoint, but I'd be remiss to not mention it, is Teams. Again, Teams is not a SharePoint site. It's replace Skype. It's all your meetings. It can be chat. You've got some things from emails you can go in there. You've got files, which of course do live on SharePoint. They live on that SharePoint team site. If I created that SharePoint team site earlier and I wanted to make a new team for the dispatch group, I could make it and attach it to that site, or I could make a new one and it makes a new SharePoint site. There are other integrations as well. And the reason I bring this up, and we're using this right now for this meeting, is because that gives you a more live interactions with your data versus going to a SharePoint site and doing everything through the browser. This is kind of a portal where you can go look at a file and you can have a conversation about it, or you can spin up a meeting real quick and you can work on the stuff together. And it just kind of brings a more dynamic experience into what SharePoint already has. So those are the types of sites and teams that you have available to you in SharePoint. You can make templates off of those base templates, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit in this next section about design and provisioning. So like I said, you've got those two templates that you can do from the ground up, but what if those don't fit what your design is? Can you make it so that anytime someone makes a new SharePoint site, it looks how you want it to right out of the box? Yes, you can. And so I'm going to talk about that now. I want to talk about color schemes first, and I'll show you an example of how to make those real quick. But in the past, in classic SharePoint, if you wanted to change color schemes or anything, you could use CSS. You'd have to put that in custom master pages or directly on a page, or you'd call a SharePoint developer in here and you'd say, I want this element over here in the right. I want a vertical column that goes all the way to the right on my home page, or I want this page layout to do this. You had to call a developer to do all of that, and you would tinker with the files inside SharePoint directly. And I don't know how long you guys have been working with SharePoint, but if you've been in an environment that was like that, it's the cause of like 80–90% of the problems inside classic on-premises SharePoint. When you would do that, you could have something wrong with your custom code, or an update could break it, and you just end up running into a lot of issues. In modern SharePoint, they don't give you all that power by default, and you don't necessarily want that. You want to keep it simple. You don't want updates to break your design. So they simplified it into what are called site themes, where you can basically make a color scheme that can be applied in different places, and site designs, which are basically a template that you would choose when you're creating a site. So let's talk about what those look like. First, the site theme. On classic SharePoint, you could give them a 100-page style guide that your marketing department made that said, we got to use these fonts and this color here and this color there and all of this ridiculous stuff. And they do it. You'd spend thousands of hours maybe and a lot of money, but you could do it. And modern SharePoint, they don't really want you to do that. And from a person who implements this is nice for me, because now instead of spending over a year doing an implementation, I just spend a few months doing everything. The way that it works is you can go to this theme generator website. It's this Office UI Fabric. I think there's a friendlier URL than this that you can use, but if you just search for SharePoint theme generator or Office UI Fabric theme generator, you can find this. And you have 3 things you can put in here. You have your primary theme color, so that's going to be like your accent color. Mine was red on those examples, right? This red, one of these reds, I think it's this one right here. And also, you can put your body text color. So what color do you want your font to be? You can't say what font do you want it to be, but you can say what color you want it to be. And what background color. You know what? I'll use this weird blue. And you can see it actually changes the page that I'm on when I do this. So those are the 3 colors. This is another one of those battles you're going to have to fight when you're doing this implementation, especially if marketing or one of those visual departments is on the project. They're going to be like, well, we have all of these things. That's cool. Thanks for handing me that 100-page style guide. I need your primary theme color, your body text color, and your background color. And start with that. And what that does is it spits out these 3 blocks of code. You can pick your poison, but I'm going to take PowerShell. That's what I'm comfortable with. And you can see it spits out a whole color palette. It's not just giving me those 3 colors. It makes a palette for you. And if I scroll down, it actually shows you what that palette is. Problem is, it doesn't tell you what's used where, and that's where you run into issues. Is if you want, you can go into this code and you can change all of these colors. You can change this whole color palette if you want. But again, you don't know necessarily what goes where, and you're running into a risk of things looking kind of weird. So usually I'll leave this alone. On some clients, I'll go and I'll do maybe a secondary color or a light color, maybe just change one of these colors. And that's turned out all right. Like maybe they've got 2 colors and you want a secondary highlighter. You want one of these buttons to maybe be a different color. You can do that, but the results are kind of unpredictable. But this gives you kind of samples of what your output would look like, what some of these fields would look like, what your buttons look like, what your selections look like. If you don't like it, you can go in here really quick and change that to this horrible color scheme instead. And you can see all of this stuff changes. So you take this code and you run some PowerShell. It's a add SPO theme. If you guys are familiar with the SharePoint Online PowerShell, you do add SPO theme, and the palette you push through is going to be this, which you apply to a variable and push it through. And what it does is it creates a theme in your SharePoint tenant that if I go to change the look on any site, or if you're in a cluster of sites, you would do it just on the hub because they all inherit from the hub. I could go into the theme, and you can see under company themes, these are all the themes that I created doing that. So that's great. So I can do that, and people can change their themes. You could make 3 or 4 custom company themes, and you could remove all the others so that they can only choose from those themes when they make a site. But what if you wanted to automatically set that theme? You would do what's called a site design. And what a site design is, let me explain it to you in this next slide real quick. When you create a site in classic SharePoint, you would call you'd call your SharePoint admin, or maybe you have self-service turned on, or maybe they use PowerShell. You'd create the site and you'd pick one of those templates, and the master page kind of determines the color scheme. In Modern, you have what are called site scripts. It's a set of actions that kick off inside what's called a site design. And let me show you real quick what a site design is. But so that script kicks off when you choose a site design. I can't really show you. I can't really go to SharePoint Home without, and I can't really show you my NDA information that I have under there. But basically, if I go to SharePoint Home and I try to create a new site, you can choose between team and communication sites, and each of those is going to have a drop down where you can pick what template out of those, what design. And so if I make my own design that runs a script that has the instruction to set the color scheme, they can then go in and they would say, I want to make a new communication site using the corporate color, using the corporate template, and it would run that site script and create all of the things that you need to create. It can do more than just set color schemes. I could also have it automatically create document libraries or lists or set permissions. There's lots of things you can do inside that site script that run that will help build your site out, which is very helpful. If there are limits to what that site script can do, however, if you noticed on that slide I was sharing, it says you can use PNP, PowerShell, and Flow, because you can use within that site script, you can call a flow that you created, which can then call Azure Functions or any other custom development you want to do and do all kinds of powerful things. So you could make it that to where if I create a site, it will use a PNP template, right? You can make a template that spits out code for your entire site. You can make it so that if I click this site design, it runs the script, which runs a flow, which runs which runs an Azure function that runs PowerShell, that pushes through that entire template and builds, for example, my whole communication site. Maybe I made a template out of this with all of these web parts on here, and I had a bunch of other pages and these news articles. I could spit all of those out. Pages are a little bit harder, but I could spit all of it out and then build that into my site design so that I can just keep making this over and over again. It's not as easy as the old classic SharePoint create a site template functionality, which is long gone, but it'll do essentially the same thing. And if you get kind of developer-y with it, you can do a lot more. My friend Bo Cameron, he'll be speaking at SharePoint Denver that Sharon announced earlier. He does a session where he made Clippy, and Clippy will come in and tell you when you make a new SharePoint site, Clippy shows up and tells you everything that he's doing along the way, and it brings in all kinds of other services and cool things that I can't even begin to wrap my head around because I'm not a developer. So the experience is way more robust now than it used to be, and there's more stuff coming. They're working on, as far as I know, some new provisioning stuff that they haven't really shared any specifics about it yet, but they're doing some more things along these lines to help you spit out more and more templates. So how do you get ideas of how to make this? Again, it used to be you'd call a marketer or a designer or something and they'd build wireframes and do all kinds of weird things, and then you'd call a SharePoint developer and they do all that. What if you want to use the method that I just told you about and make it yourself? Well, there's this thing called the SharePoint Lookbook. And it used to be an actual book, but now there's a website about it. It's sharepointlookbook.azurewebsites.net. And what it is it has a ton of examples of modern SharePoint sites and pages and tells you exactly how to make them. So if I want to look at some intranet home pages, I'm sure this will be updated when the new home sites come out. I say I can look at this and go, oh, I like this one. So I click on it and it shows you what the site looks like on the home page. Looks pretty similar to that communication site I keep showing you. And then it tells you what it's doing. It changed the background color, which is one of the things you can do under the look and feel. Right, if I go to change the look and I go to header, I can change the background color within my theme, right? And it tells you what it did there. It's got section backgrounds. You could change the background color on specific sections, and I'll tell you what sections are in a minute. It tells you what web parts they've used, and we'll go over some of those a little bit. And there's just a ton of examples on here that show there. Hub sites with roll-ups from the other sites that are related to it. Communication sites, team sites, and so forth. And there's even some guidance if you click on here that has like design guidelines that tells you some other things that you can do there with lots of information. So that's a good resource to use when you're trying to make these, because again, the user friendliness becomes very apparent as soon as you start digging into here. I've done a few implementations now with companies, and they can do it with pretty little training. They can start building their own pages and sites. Okay. So I've told you a bunch about how to provision the sites, but what's actually inside the sites? The site, that's your stuff at the top. You've got your navigation, you've got your site name, but what actually goes inside it? And we're going to start with pages because that is the main thing sites are made of when you think of any website. And those are a lot easier to build than classic SharePoint. You used to have web part zones that, again, would have to be built into page layouts. And if there weren't any out-of-the-box ones that fit those page layouts, you'd have to call a developer in there, and they'd come in, they'd build the page layouts, and then have to lock down the ones that you can't use and do this whole thing. That's kind of a nightmare when I have flashbacks thinking about it. Instead of the zones, they now have what are called sections and columns, and it's really dynamic, and you can still use page templates. So let me show you how all of that works. I'm going to go back here to my communication site again, and I'm just going to click new, and I can make lots of things from here, but I'm going to pick page. And I've got some templates under here already. These are the out-of-the-box ones, and when I click on them, it shows me a cool preview of that page. And I always pick this one, and so I'm going to pick this one this time too. I'm going to click create page. It builds it out of the box for you. And like I said before, there's sections. If you can see these rows right here, each of these rows is called a section. And I have a header, then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5 rows, and then this comments down on the bottom. I can add as many of these as I want, and I can break it into different columns. So I've got this one right here. If I want to change this section that already exists, I can click this little edit button, and I can change the layout of it on the fly. If I want to go 1 column or 2, 3, 1/3 either side, and I can even put a background color behind it if I want. Again, no custom development necessary. Very easy to do. And I can drag things around within these sections. This is more web part, and I'll get back to it, but I can drag things around within it. Very easy. If I want to get rid of something, if I want to get rid of one of these sections or move it around, I can move it around. Maybe I want it to go above this one, or no, I don't want this at all. I can copy it, or I can just delete it. Whole section gone, no custom development. So that's really cool. So there's other kinds of sections in here. I can make a full width section. And that goes all the way across. Most of these don't because, again, they're made to be responsive. But if I want to make a full width one, I can, though there are only certain things I can put inside that full width. Right, I can put a hero web part. I'll show you some of those. I can put one of these and make it full width. I can make this countdown right here be full width, banners, stuff, and an image. Okay, so that's our sections, and it's really cool how you can do that just on the fly. Again, very easy. Non-technical people can come in here with a little bit of training and make really pretty pages like that. But how do they know what to put on those pages? Well, you have web parts, just like in classic SharePoint, though those have also gotten a lot of facelifts, and they've thrown out a lot of the old ones that weren't so useful. So I'm going to just show a section of these. There's so many different web parts, and they've deprecated a lot of the old ones, so you're really going to need to get in here and mess with it. You can get a demo tenant or a dev tenant or even just spin up a trial, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the web parts. It used to be you'd have a ribbon at the top of your page where you'd have to go find a web part, then you'd have to go through all the categories, and you may or may not find one that's useful. Now, if I want to add a web part, I just kind of put the mouse where I want it to go inside my section, right inside the column in my section, and I click on this little plus. I get a little box, and if I want to make the box bigger, click these arrows, and now I have this giant toolbox full of web parts that is searchable. So if I want to search for a specific thing like Power Apps, I can type in Power Apps, and there I go. I've got some basic ones up here under Featured. I could add text, images, files if I want to put a PowerPoint or a PDF, Word, whatever. Links, if I want to embed something, you can do that. Highlighted content, that is a web part that I'm going to show you because that one is very useful now. And then just a bunch of other stuff. You can put Kindle in here, maps, Twitter feeds. You saw I have a Twitter feed on my homepage over here. Yammer stuff, Microsoft Forms, Power Apps, Power BI. You saw right here's some Power BI on this site. Just a ton of new things that are actually useful instead of having 100 web parts that are not. You can also make your own custom web parts using some modern techniques that we'll talk about. So I want to show you the highlighted content web part first before we go into the next stuff and start running out of time. Highlighted content, I mentioned earlier that you can make content dynamic a lot more than you used to be able to do. And this is one of those web parts that is very helpful for that. If you're familiar with the content by search web part in classic SharePoint, this is very similar, but it's a lot more user-friendly. I put it on here and I can go edit it again, but without clicking 3 clicks like you used to in classic SharePoint. I can click this little pencil, or I can move it around if I want. I'm just going to click this pencil, and this brings up all of the properties for whatever web part you're on. And with this highlighted content, I'm basically saying do a search that I define at all times. So whenever I come to this page, I'm going to have whatever results are in there. So I could look at different all sites that are in this hub. I can look at pages. I could look at whatever's on this site collection. I can look at a specific document library. And you can see it filters, and I can then filter it down more if I want to only show a certain type of document in there. Or if I want to filter by certain things like what's included in the title or what's recently added, or if I have a custom column in here, and search has had time to crawl. Once search has crawled that, I can go into column name. I can type that column that I made on this document library. For example, if I want to make a category under my benefits site for 401k and medical, dental, things like that, I could look at the category column, and then I could say where category equals 401k. So it would only show me documents in this document library of that have 401k as that category set on them. And the way that works, so now I can make a 401k page with some text that'll never change, but then I put my 401k documents web part right next to it. And now going forward, whenever a new 401k document happens, they just upload it to the document library, tag it as 401k, and it's going to show up on the right page automatically. So that means it's a lot more dynamic and easy to update. You don't have to have someone going in there and say, hey, did you look at the 401k page? Your users should already know that if I go to the 401k page, I will always be able to find my most up-to-date 401k documents instead of sending emails around or going on some weird detective adventure. You could also turn on audience targeting on this, by the way. So if you've got pages or something showing up, or you can set things to only show for certain audiences, so that it will be, if I come in and I'm under legal, I can see things that are allowed for me, but if I'm under HR, maybe I can't, right? So you can do cool things there with audience targeting. You can also change how it looks, grid, list, carousel. You can do this with other things too, links. Again, it's pretty versatile. All right, so there's lots of other web parts that have this kind of use. This one is my favorite one in Modern because we can build so many different sites or different pages. Say you build that 401k page, but you want the same one for medical and dental and all of that. You can save this as a template if I want. Go to save as template. And now when they go to make a new page, they can get a benefits page as their templates, and they'll have that ready to go. And all they have to do is change they can change the text and what category they're looking at. So it takes 5 minutes to make this page versus spending an hour each time you want to make the same page. Okay, so that's pretty much it about pages. We'll talk about some other things like news later because that's kind of related to what we're doing. You could also put approvals on. You can see I have submit for approval, but again, that's part of the news thing that I'm going to talk about later. So those are our web parts. You also have the usual suspects of lists and libraries inside your sites. And again, I'm going to go over here, show you a library. I'm not going to save this page. I'm just going to back out of here or close it and go back to home. So lists and libraries still exist in almost the same way. If you're in SharePoint Online now and you're using classic sites, you're still using modern lists and libraries probably, unless you specifically said you didn't want to. So again, even if you're on a classic site, this should be the same. And libraries, I'll show you, it's pretty much the same as it used to be. They run faster. It's easier to make columns than it used to be. This is that category thing I was telling you about. You see I've got a column 401k, and if I made that 401k thing, it would show up there. I could add other columns really quick. You can see how many different columns I can add. And there's even, you can put like map information in these now. There's tons of things you can do inside these columns. But you can hook this up. I can sync it with OneDrive. If you're using Teams on a team site, that obviously hooks to one of those document libraries. You should be pretty familiar with this. All of that works the same. Microsoft Flow can integrate with this. So if you want to put approval workflows or anything like that on these document libraries, you can do that. I'm going to talk about lists now. Lists, if you guys don't know, are almost the same thing as a library, except for a library has a file with like information about it, like a Word document or something. you can attach things in lists, but it doesn't have the same kind of versioning. And documents are file first, and list is information first. So list can be information with an attachment, whereas a document library is a document with some information about the document on it, if that makes any sense. So I've got a list here, my service request list. And it's just a bunch of data. It's a set of tabular data. I know you could do this in Excel, but the nice thing about doing this in SharePoint is you can integrate it with a bunch of other stuff. It's a lot more simple to use than Excel, for better or for worse. This is kind of a flat tabular data, which you can do more. You can do other things in Excel than that. But there's some cool things here I want to tell you about. If I want to click on an item, I have this new-ish, if you're not familiar with Modern SharePoint, information pane that I can pop open, and I can change my my properties right here. And this is the same thing in the document library. It works the same way. If I have a document and I click this information, I can go here and I can change the metadata directly on this panel. You don't have to go edit item and do all those like 4 or 5 clicks that it used to take to do that. As soon as I click off of this, it saves. If I've got technician notes here, if I change that and click off of it, well, this one I have to hit a check. But on any of these other ones, if I change service tech, it'll just save. A couple other things that are cool, I can use this filter pane over here, and I can filter it, and all this is automatic. It indexes your fields here, your columns, and makes them filterable automatically. I can search on here. You can use search works better in documents than here, but you can search on this. You can do custom formatting. You can see here I've got colors depending on the status, and that's really easy to do too. I did not do any custom code for this. I just went to column settings, format this column. If you've got a choice field, it already has a template you can use. So I can go to edit template, and it just says, okay, here's your choices. What color do you want each of them to be? And you just change the color here and hit save. If you want to get fancy or use a different, like a calculated column, I can go over here. This is a service duration. It kind of looks at two of these columns and tells you, are you accurate with your predictions? I could go in under here, and if I go to format this column, it's a little fancier. There's a reference. There's like a dev reference for this custom formatting, and I just went there and I found some code samples. There's tons of it. Again, I'm not a developer. And all I did is I went in here and looked at it, and you can see if this field is greater than 1, severity blocked, which is a style, like class is style severity blocked, which is red. If it is equal to 1, it's good, so severity good, which is a green color. And again, these documents that I'm telling you about that I forgot to put on my thing, I discovered this last week. And then there is as well the warning. Warning is yellow. So this took me probably a half hour of research to figure out how to do this. But again, code samples, with a little bit of digging, I was able to figure out how to do this. And you can do this on all kinds of things. You can do it with date, text, whatever you want. You can do this custom formatting and help people look at things with a glance. Microsoft, they have announced, I don't know exactly what all they've shown, so I'm not going to speak out of turn, but they have announced that Teams is going to start getting closer experiences to the SharePoint list. And I don't know what they've announced beyond that, so I can't say too much. But these lists will be useful on Teams as well, because right now, last I checked, the integrations with Team and SharePoint weren't one-to-one, but they are going to be getting closer to that. So if you have any questions at the end of this, we'll have time. But that's about it for lists and libraries. Again, Flow, you're already using these, so on classic SharePoint, if you're in online now, Flow works with it. You can do a lot of things here. You can spit this information to Power BI or Power Apps. Power Apps can push into a SharePoint list. Then Power BI can show that information. That's what I've got going on here. We've got some Power Apps that put information into that request list. And then I've got a dashboard here where I can go look at all those requests, and it's sorted by all of this cool stuff. I can click on a technician and see all of their jobs that they've done, or I can click on it by status. You can click on a specific location and find information about it. So lots of neat things you can do with that data. Okay. Next, we're running low on time, but I think we might actually have time for questions this time. Next, I want to talk about news. News is a newish feature in SharePoint that is very powerful and is really good at driving adoption inside your organization, because not necessarily everyone cares about news and announcements inside your company, but they definitely don't care if you're sending them in emails that are going to get lost somewhere. So news can help you care a little bit more about those. And there's a ton of features in there that I'm going to just kind of show you real quick. I actually have a whole session on just news alone because there's so much you can do with it. I don't remember if that's the one I submitted for you guys for the Kansas City SharePoint Saturday, if I submitted this one. If I submitted this one, Sharon, let's talk. Maybe I'll do the news one for that. So news, you can see right here, I've got this company news area right here on my home site. And you can do this on team sites or communication sites. It's just a web part. It's called the news web part. If I edit my page, you can see it's called news. Just click on it, news. And it works very similar to that highlighted content web part I showed you, where you can filter it down. This is recommended for current user. So this comes from sites that I follow and based off of like my interests and stuff. I can have it look at just this site, every site within this hub, like hub and spoke model, or select sites. Lots of cool things you can do there. Recommended is a good way to keep it relevant to the user. So if I come in here as, Jim Bob, if I want to see news that is relevant to me, I'm going to keep this selected as a person who built this page. Sorry if that train is very loud. You can have a couple other options. You can change how it looks, right? Things like that. You can set the order of the news that shows up. But what I want to talk about as far as the news goes is this news is actually just, all of these are just regular pages. So I'm gonna stop editing this, and I'm gonna go click on one of those news articles that I made, and you're gonna notice it looks almost identical to the pages that I've been making, that I made earlier, because it is. News is just a property that's set on a page that tells it to show up here. And so if I go here, we'll do this I quit one, and look, it's just a page like the one like I was working on before. And what I did is you could make it from the news web part. There's like an add news button, or I can click promote on a page that I already made. And you can see I can click post as news if it wasn't already news. Sorry guys, I'm gonna mute for like 2 seconds while the train is right next to me. All right, I guess they're going to slow down and stop and park there all day. They like to do that. Okay, so anyway, I can post this as news. I can also save it as a template or spit it out in navigation. But it's just a property that gets set on top of a page. And what's cool about that, since you can do it with any page, and because you have it, it's a page property, you could then do a flow on that, and you can have flows that affect only pages that are news. That's what I've actually done. Like I have a submit button, a submit for approval. Whenever I click on any of these pages, you can see this says review approvals because this one needs to be approved. But if a page is a news article, it has to be approved before it's allowed to show up. But if it's just a regular page, it is automatically approved, and it does that by looking at that is news kind of field. But other things you can do with news, it shows up here. I can create what's called a news digest. If I go to see all, I can see all my news articles, and I have a button that says email and news digest. And I don't want to jump into everything, like managed posts is a whole other can of worms. But if I go to email news digest, I can say, hey, it's time for our weekly newsletter or monthly newsletter, whatever, and I want these articles to show up in it. And I'm just going to go ahead and click those and click next. And I can say to everyone in the company or specific groups, add a message to it, whatever I want. Change the order of the articles, and I can send this out as a newsletter, and it'll have little previews for the articles, and your users can then click on it, and then it'll drive them to the site. It'll take them to the full article. That sounds like it's not a big deal, but it is, because how is that any different than just emailing on a newsletter? It is, because it drives them back to the site. And with one of my customers, within about 6 months, they had gone from 100% emailed newsletter to this model where they have constant news. As information comes, they immediately post it as news, but then they just send a digest weekly or monthly for those stragglers who only care about it from their email. And then they get it in their email, and then they come to the site, and there's other stuff on the site they want them to look at, so they stick around for a while. And I know that sounds like marketing fluff, but from what I've seen, it's actually true. They actually do come to the site. They do like it, which is weird. Users typically don't like it when you tell them to use stuff, but it does work out pretty well. Other things you can do to make news nicer, beyond just making those page layouts, if you have a specific news layout you want to use in making a page template, you can do audience targeting. Like I was saying earlier, if everyone comes to the same site and I want HR to see things and legal to see things, I can have that all show up in the same news article by using that, or in the same news web part by using that audience targeting that I was talking about. Other things you can do to kind of push news out is you can designate a site what's called an authoritative news site. And what that means is that any news that's posted on this site is important and everyone needs to see it. And how that shows up, how that surfaces, is I made this communication site an authoritative news source. And what that means is that any news I post here is going to get, or from this site, is going to get this big block on it that says communications. You can see some of these have it, or a lot of them do, and some don't. It's because the ones that have this big block are on this authoritative news site. So if I had another one called news, this block would say news. These ones are from regular sites that are not authoritative. They don't have that block on them. What that also means beyond that block is if I'm using the SharePoint mobile app and we're looking at news, it will be filtered into my news, takes kind of precedence over it. If I clicked on this SharePoint start page that a lot of people don't like, and I can't show it to you because I have a lot of NDA stuff in there, the news at the top of that would also show this. It would show the authoritative news. So if you have a designated area or team or something where you want to do that has important news, you can do that, and it'll set this visual indicator on top of it. Beyond that, if you want to make it easier for people to make these news and announcements, your templates are cool, but what if you want to use the same stock photos all the time? There's another thing that's out, or it's rolling out, called organization assets. And what that allows you to do is I don't have it in my tenant, but you can designate a document library as your organization assets. And that means that if I can go anywhere on any SharePoint site and I'm making a news article or a page or something, and I want to put an image in there, let's go edit this, and I'm going to say I want to use an image. I could go, look, there could be an authoritative news source here, and it would basically be your repository for stock photos, and I could go here and use all the images that the organization has approved for me to use. And then that way, when they go through the approval process that I was talking about, maybe the reviewer looks and says, hey, they used a photo that is not in our approved organizational assets, and you could maybe reject on that basis. So lots of cool things with news. I think it's way more robust than the old announcements list that was in classic SharePoint. And the fact that you can put all this, make it dynamic, means that users are actually going to read it. If you're sending news out as an email and it's just text, it might not be as cool as if you have a video, or if I go back home and I can click, I've got a poll in here, right? I've got a form on the, which hot chicken is your favorite? I've got a Microsoft form embedded right in my news article with comments on it. And so you can actually have that be more dynamic. You can have it be interactive. So, hey, we made this news article. What do you think about the new changes we're making? Tell us in the comments. And they can comment on it if you want. All right, so that's enough about news. Running low on time, and I've got a couple more things I want to talk about. Search has been vastly improved in modern SharePoint, but it's even gone beyond SharePoint now to where it's kind of in your whole tenant and can even integrate with Bing and go across all of your stuff. I'm not going to sit here and show it to you beyond a cursory search at the top. I can search across my sites. As soon as I click in here, it starts to recommend me things. If I start typing, it will immediately give me results. And if I click on things that are documents, like, I don't know, do I have a 401k? We'll just look. So if I, excuse me, if I click on something that has a document with it and I hover over it, I can actually get a preview of that as well. I don't know why it's not giving. There we go. All right, so you can see here if I click on files. Oh, because it's .docx. Wow, how long has that been changed and I still do the wrong one? So you can click on there and you can see here's a guide that I put on here, and if I hover over it, there's a little preview, or I can click this little drop down and get even more and open it in a new tab. Lots of things that search does that they've been talking about. search is going to start, or will continue to do more and more AI stuff to where it can recommend more and more relevant results back to you across all of your different sources of data. And again, search is a whole session or set of sessions on its own, so I'm not going to sit there too long. Navigation's a little bit different. I already showed you that communication sites have navigation or local navigation on the top like this. Team sites have it on the left. But what I also have at the top here is this hub navigation, and that's navigation you set at the hub site level, so that any site that you attach to this hub will get the same navigation. So if I go to the dispatch dashboard over here, it says corporate comms, I have the same navigation up here. It's not global across all your hub sites, but what you can do is you can write a script that can kind of do that, where you can just push this navigation to each hub site, which will then in turn push that navigation to each site that's attached to any given hub. Sounds kind of confusing, I know. There's a couple design things you can do. You can't do full design like you used to be able to in classic SharePoint, where you change the master page and make weird mega navs with scripts and stuff in them. But you have two options. You have this old school cascading one where it pops down, and if I go over, it slides out. Or I can go under change the look like I was doing earlier, go under navigation, and I can change it to mega menu instead. And that is exactly what you would think of when you think of mega navs, in that you can get headings with little subheadings, and it's bigger. Okay. Those are the only options you get there right now. Also, I would consider as navigation under change the look, you have a footer that you can change the background color will kind of match the header. You can add your own logo to it, and you can add some links down at the bottom as well, which is pretty neat. Editing navigation is super easy. You click the edit button, pops out to the side. You can just add links where you want. You can make them sublinks of other links, or you can promote them, move them up and down. You can have headers, and that a header being something that doesn't that a URL goes somewhere, right? A header is just text that shows up there. You can use headers. That's about it for navigation. You can use scripts to push these. So if you wanted to, those site designs I was talking about, those site scripts, you can have those create the navigation automatically for you. So you can do all of this kind of dynamically or automated. Okay, next, custom development has changed. Classic SharePoint on premises, you would do server-side code. Obviously in the cloud, you do not have any servers to deal with that you have access to anyway. But you could use client-side stuff, but you could throw them directly on a page in a script editor web part. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. People could just throw whatever code they wanted on a SharePoint page that had the potential to make it explode. Not physically, but you could very easily break something. And so people did. And they got rid of that. The script editor web part is gone. Someone has made a custom web part that does that, but I'm not going to tell you where it is because putting script in the middle of a page is not a great idea. The modern way of doing this, there's this thing called the SharePoint framework that was released probably a couple years ago now. That is the way they want you to do it. It's all client side, and any developer should be able to do this. It used to be you needed a SharePoint developer to do any development. Now you just need a developer, and they need to spend a couple hours looking at the SharePoint framework, and they can probably pick it up as they go. You can use that. You can do all of the heavy lifting inside Azure. You can make Azure web apps or Azure functions or logic apps, whatever you want to do, and you can call that with the SharePoint framework, basically offloading all of the work and just showing what you need to show on SharePoint. There's also a new client-side object model for those of you who care about that. I'm not going to jump any further in depth onto this or into this because I'm not a developer, and my understanding is pretty basic. Beyond when my team does stuff, I say, hey, developer, make us a new SharePoint framework web part instead of doing it server-side. You're limited in what you can do with that. To a degree, you're limited on where you can place SharePoint framework stuff, but the amount of things you can do and integrations you can do with it is vast. Last couple things, governance and adoption. These are big ones. This is kind of why you do all of this in the first place, why you even go to Modern in the first place. If it's got some of these difficulties, why? If it works now, why do something new? Well, chances are it's not working that great now. There's probably a lot of pain points you can resolve. And the way you do this is by changing to a new security and governance model. And what you want to do is you want to empower your users. they shouldn't have to call you anytime they want to link on a page or if they want to create a SharePoint site. As an IT person, you should not be doing the like site owner stuff. You should empower them to do it. They should be creating their sites. They should be managing the permissions of the sites. Maybe you give them some groups in Office 365 to use, but they should decide who's allowed to see this site that they're in control of. To a degree, if you've got a home site, maybe IT and somebody controls that, or marketing or whatever. But again, the user should be messing with that. You don't want to inherit permissions down the block because, again, we don't have a hierarchy anymore. Now we have permissions on each site, but we can use groups and we can make that work and we can group them together on a hub site. So if I come into that hub site, I see things that I have permission to see that are in there, but nothing that I don't. Right? It takes a lot of planning up front, but once you simplify it like that, it makes it a lot easier for your users to manage and for you as an IT person to manage. Right? If they're making all their content and they're putting out all their small fires, you don't have to do that anymore. Does that mean you're fired? I hope not. It should mean that you are going to monitor and guide them. You shouldn't be putting out fires all day. You should be working on, as an IT person, growing like your presence, right? You want to make IT work for the company, not just support it with thumbtacks and band-aids. So you can do things like work on a security and governance plan. Start thinking about security classifications. Like what information on this site, like how important is it? If they left these documents in a cab, does the whole company go under tomorrow? If so, then maybe we want to put some labeling and some site classification and turn off external sharing for that information. Right? They could be watching the Office 365 or the Microsoft 365 Admin Center and the SharePoint Admin Center to see, are we making too many SharePoint sites? Or do we already have a SharePoint site that does that function? Or, hey, this site hasn't been used in 6 months. Maybe we should talk to the site owner and get rid of it. Or that site owner isn't with us anymore. Do we need that site anymore? Those are things that IT could be doing proactively rather than having to just deal with stuff as it comes all the time and spend all their days putting links on pages because the site owner doesn't know how to do that. It really, as an IT person, I enjoy doing this. There's a lot more you can do to make your Office 365/SharePoint implementation successful when you're not trying to play catch up all day. So I think that should be your major takeaway from this, is that yes, it is upfront work. You do have to do planning. There is going to be culture shifts. You might have to fight a few battles, but after you get through all of that, user adoption tends to go a lot faster. It tends to be less painful things for IT to deal with, or at least new painful things for IT to deal with, but not the old ones anymore. And it just is, there's a lot of benefits to it. So I'd recommend you digging into it. Either get a demo tenant, or if you have one at work, ask for someone to make you a SharePoint site if you're not an admin, and let you poke around if you're just a site owner type. Maybe get familiar with those web parts, because maybe you are classic SharePoint and IT might be the hurdle here. Sometimes IT is, and that's okay. They probably have reasons. But maybe you ask them, hey, can I dig into this, or can we dig into this together and see what we can find and pilot this? Because it doesn't take a lot of time. That the sites that I've been showing you, I've not spent months building these. I've been building them every time I do one of these sessions. I add something new, and so it doesn't take that much to build these. It's worth looking into. So that's all I have. I know we're pretty much out of time, so if you've got any questions, let me know. I'll do my best to answer them in the 0 minutes we have left. So just let me know.
Thanks so much, Nick. Does anybody have any quick questions? We'll do a couple minutes of questions and then we'll do our drawing. It's a lot of new information, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of threads to pull here.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of changes happening. I will tell you, I'm with Nick. I've been watching this over the last couple of years as it's been developing, and it does make our lives a lot easier on both ends. Also makes it a lot nicer to look at. But at the same time, it's a lot to learn really fast. So any questions at all? They're all full, like you can see it, like
Yeah.
Their brains are full up to their eyeballs. So thank you so much, Nick. If you guys did not sign in and get a raffle ticket, please make sure you do that real quick and we'll do a drawing. I've got a couple of sets of Microsoft headphones to give away today. Jonathan, do you have any questions on anybody online? Any questions?
We gotta thank you, Nick.
Awesome, thank you. But yeah, I know it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for me sometime too. But it's not as bad as having to learn classic SharePoint. I'll tell you, I had to spend years learning that stuff. It's months instead. It's worth it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we're getting our raffle tickets together, and then we're going to do our drawing here in just a second. If you still need a raffle ticket or haven't signed in, back table. Do it real quick and we'll do that last. So I have these super duper fancy Microsoft earbuds in blue and green. I think they're kind of cool. They come with the little extra ones and everything. So we'll do drawing for these, and first person can choose their color and the other person gets the other color, but they're both pretty cool colors, so. All right, everybody got a ticket? All right. The first one is 0632373. Woohoo! All right. You just come for the swag, don't you?
That's a good strike.
All right, 632377. All right, thank you guys for coming. See you next month. I have been recording these, like I mentioned, so I do have a YouTube channel called, I think it's like KC Office 365 User Group. The link is on the website, on the Office 365 User Group website. And if you need it, just email me, and I'll try to send it out. I'll try to remember to send it out. All right, thank you so much, Nick.
Thanks, everyone. See you guys at SharePoint Saturday.